Hello, welcome to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. This is Pete Lee, and we will, as always, be talking about all things Chilean. And today's subject is a fairly delicate one. It's the subject of skin colour and power. What here in Chile is called Pigmentocracy, which is rule, a bit of a bastard etymology, Greek ending, Latin beginning.
Yes.
Rule by skin colour.
Yes, or rule by lack of skin colour. Of course, pigmentocracy was actually coined in Chile by an immigrant.
Oh yeah.
A Jewish Latvian immigrant called Alejandro Lipschutz, who arrived, originally he arrived Concepcion in the 1920s. Concepcion, of course, is the Chilean colonial city facing the frontera.
Okay, where the Mapuche, the Araucanian territory began.
Yes.
Further south.
Yes, and always great cultural interchange between the Spanish colonial and Chilean Republican projects and what had become the Mapuche identity, people resistant to absorption into the Chilean state.
That's right. Very obviously important element in Chilean politics and society, because the Maguchi Territory did become, in effect, a kind of independent state at one point, from being very, not really having any political organisation. It did kind of organise to an extent in response to Chilean Spanish incursions.
Yes.
And to the point where kind of Araucanian independence, the existence of the state was recognised by treaty, really, wasn't it?
Yes, different treaties between different groups, not unified. The Mapuche were not unified, and they're on both sides of the Andes. Invaded the Argentinian side.
That's right.
Really in the 18th century, even in the early 19th century, and invaded back from the Argentinian side of Patagonia to the Chilean side of Patagonia, and Mapuchinized people of what is now Aysén, Chilean Patagonia.
So there were invasion, colonization takes place at from the macro to the micro level everywhere.
Macro to the micro, and a lot of cultural interchange, and
a lot of interchange of population, and the Chilean population that we now have is very largely Mapuche.
Yes, or pre-Mapuche, because anthropologists like to consider the Mapuche as that part of the central Chilean Amerindian culture that was resistant to the colonial and republican projects.
I see.
And came into being in interaction with the Spanish colonial efforts.
I see. Okay, but on this episode, we're talking essentially about skin colour, racial characteristics, and so all of these political nuances kind of rather dissolve into a simple question of how dark you are.
Yes, it's interesting. Yes.
So here in Chile, we had, because at the end we're going to talk about how things have changed in the last 5 years, really. We had a population that, in terms of pigment, at one end was quite dark-skinned, Amerindian, essentially.
And a lot of African as well. Chileans.
There was slavery. There was slavery in Chile, wasn't there, during colonial times?
Yes, and there's a funny sort of folkloric belief among the Chileans that they don't have African descent, and we know from the genetic record that clearly they do. Of course, the country was liberated by an army led by the Argentinian San Martin, and an army consisting largely of freed slaves from the other side of the Andes, Cuyo, in Argentina today, which actually was part of the Chilean Captaincy General.
Of course, Mendoza was a Chilean city.
Yes.
At one point. I didn't know that about the composition of the army.
Yes.
So we have, if you like, a very successful example of integration. These freed slaves then became free slaves. They intermarried with the
absorbed into the population.
Absorbed into the general population.
And it's notable in Aconcagua, just north of Santiago, you do see people who are clearly of African descent in large numbers. Very interesting. And just to go back to Lipschutz, the Latvian-born Jewish immigrant, a doctor, also a founder of anthropology here. As far as he could tell, Chileans were organised according to how dark their skin was, and he coined the term pigmentocracy as a critique. In English, over the last couple of decades, we've started to talk about colorism, which is very similar to pigmentocracy. It was promoted by Alice Walker, the African-American writer. Colorism is very Anglo in the sense that colorism speaks of the differences between what in English parlance, or certainly United States parlance, are considered the races. So how dark you are within the African-American race. Of course, white people have no darkness, according to the United States tradition. Not true, of course, at all. So colorism is within a racial template. And of course, the Spanish Empire had castes dividing people according to their racial makeup as well.
That's right. Now, I mean, a word on that. The Spanish developed a fascinating degree of complexity, which we're only now, in modern 21st century English-speaking countries, beginning to replicate.
Yes.
They had everything from the mestizo.
It's half and half.
That's right. Yes. But half and half of which, because if you're half black and you're half Indian, for example.
Yes, that's a sambo.
A sambo, that's right. And they had categorization after categorization, ending with a rather wonderful one, which is the el no te entiendo, the I don't understand you. So if you're kind of a 16th Indian, an 8th, black, a quarter white, then this is getting too complex.
Yes.
You're a no te entiendo.
And this affected your rights, like your right to own property, your right to become a priest.
Yeah, that's right.
Standing in the army, and so on and so forth.
That's right. And this is one part of the Spanish colonial legacy, which Chile actually seems to have quite firmly rejected.
Well, it's gone, and that's why Lipschutz was able to come up with this wonderful term, pigmentocracy, because it's simply what you look like that matters.
That's right. And the funny thing is, what struck me when I came here was that this is simply not acknowledged at all in political discourse. You've got your working, your poor, your middle class. But if you got a photo of the Chilean football team and a photo of the Chilean cabinet, you're looking at two completely different human groups. The football team, dark-skinned, very Indian-looking. The cabinet, fair-haired, totally European-looking.
Yes.
And you think, this is South Africa, this is apartheid.
It can look extreme. I mean, if you go back to the rise of the Perons in Argentina, obviously Evita, the second wife, I believe, of Juan Domingo Perón, younger than him and a very clever media operator, she would speak of her political clientele as my little blackheads, meaning darker Argentines, yes. Of course, in certainly the wealthier parts of Buenos Aires and to some extent at that time other cities, there was a notable European presence.
Yeah.
Very, very notably European, with no Amerindian descent at all. Huge populations of people descended from immigrants that had come in from the 1870s, 1880s. And then there's another group that is a mixture of European migration, Amerindian forebears, more and more Amerindians actually coming in from further in the interior, and so on and so forth. So in Argentina, this idea of, on the one hand, a middle class, which is almost a code for white, as it often is in English, middle class and white. Middle class is a more polite way to say white in some discourses. In Argentina, there's a similar concept of the white city, the idea of a middle-class Buenos Aires, and then my little blackheads in other parts. That's very explicitly acknowledged in Argentinian politics and Peronism and anti-Peronism. Whereas in Chile, it's not openly acknowledged, and yet it's very, very clear.
You would think, to listen to what people say, officially, political discourse, is this a society divided by class? And I believe that actually, fundamentally, that is true. But class coincides very closely with race.
Yes.
So if you wanted to say this is a society divided by race, then that could look very plausible as well. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It was certainly the impression I got when I first came here.
That's right. And in fact, if you look at it a bit more closely, it's not South Africa, it's not apartheid, because there was always this creature called the Roto Rubio. A roto's rather rude way of saying basically a fairly poor person who's...
A broken person.
Literally, it means torn.
Yes.
Apparently it comes from the soldiers who returned from Peru, Bolivia in the Pacific War of the 19th century, and with their clothes all hang off them in shreds and tatters. So the torn clothes...
Well, I've heard actually another story. There's much earlier than that. It's the first attempts to colonize Chile from Cusco in Peru resulted in a lack of success in finding gold, and people such as Diego Malgo
the only worthy objective of exploration and colonization at that time.
In shreds. So Chileans are called Rotos by Bolivians and Peruvians who don't like Chileans very much.
Well, as always when we get into Chilean etymology, we find ourselves advancing through a fog, but it seems we agree that the Roto probably does refer to torn clothes.
Yes.
So the Roto was a countryman, essentially, fairly tough and hardy. And then when countrymen started moving in large numbers to the cities, especially Santiago, they were still called Rotos. That term has now pretty much fallen out of use.
Yes, we don't use it anymore.
But a few years ago it was very much in use.
Well,
it was derogatory.
I find it useful because there's a sense of continuity in Roto. And now that marginal people, particularly younger ones, are called flaites. Flaite means, I don't know how you translate that, maybe knucklehead in North American English, a chav perhaps in...
Yeah, something like that. Basically, sort of kind of constitutionally unemployed, kind of violence, kind of fast talking, like very much of their own.
They're like sort of a kind of rap music that they have here. Trap, I think, is the latest fashion reggaeton.
Given to owning knives,
yes,
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And these are known as flaites, which seems to be a word that actually comes from Lima, where it referred to a fighter.
That's right. Anyway, but that's right. But that's another story.
Yes,
that's right. And the Roto is quite different. The Roto is a kind of more sort of honest, down to earth, son of the soil type of person.
Yes. Well, I always like to say that Valparaiso, which is a lovely old colonial city that's in very bad shape, is Roto, and Viña del Mar, which is a conservative, some would say, Pinochetist city next to Valparaiso that's taken much of the wealth out of Valparaiso as people look for more secure places to live, is flated. So that's the basic decision. It's a bit like, Viña del Mar is a bit like Miami, I guess is the idea.
Aha, got it. So there we are, so Rotos and flaites. Now, there was always this, there's a character who used to be known as El Roto Rubio, the blonde Roto. And there's also now such a thing as El Flaite Rubio.
Yes.
There are...
No?
well.
El white flaite.
You could go and see, you could go to where the poor live, and you will suddenly see a fair haired person. It's not actually just race, Or again, at the higher levels of business politics, you can find somebody very Indian looking.
Yes.
So it's not actually divided by race. It just looks awfully like it because by and large it coincides.
Yes. There's a high level of correlation.
Extremely high. And it was very strange to not see this acknowledged at all as a foreigner when he came here.
Yes.
And to realise that it wasn't just that people weren't talking about it and hushing it up, they hadn't actually noticed. They were so accustomed to this that it just seemed like part of the natural order of things.
Yes. Well, at the same time, I think people who do not have a lot of contact with the fairly rare lighter-skinned Chileans, I would say probably about 10% of Chileans look like middle-class Argentines. They look reasonably European in terms of their phenotype. Those people, when they go to a place where average Chileans predominate, will often be viewed differently.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, it's a very odd thing. In my experience, this is my subjective experience because I haven't actually asked, I've found that when I've gone to rural areas with Chileans who look roughly like me, you know, European, fair.
In that direction anyway, yes.
The country people do not seem to distinguish us. They don't, this may have changed a bit just very recently, but they only have a pretty hazy idea of foreigner. And they get different kind of foreigners mixed up and who's foreign and who isn't, and what language. I remember a cleaning lady saying to me once that she'd had a conversation with a Peruvian person and she could actually, you know, understand them extremely well.
Oh.
You know, and she was quite a linguist. You know.
Yes.
Conversely, when people see me in the countryside, I look like somebody who might live in Vitacura, Las Condes, one of the richer areas of Santiago, and they seem to accept me to the same extent, no more, but no less, than they would accept somebody from Las Condes and Vitacura. Or what I'm perhaps saying is that they actually see people from those areas who look like me as foreigners. They do not really regard them as Chilean.
Yes.
And if you were to ask a country person, you know, because the richer people here want, I think, to be accepted, because they're in a strange situation which is almost like that in some kind of fairy tale, where they have all the power, they have all the money. You look at the cabinet and it could be the cabinet of Germany or France, racially speaking. And yet I think in their hearts they know that the Chileans do not even consider them to be Chilean. They're kind of Martians. They're here, they've got all the power, they've got all the money, and kind of one day they will go away again. This is the feeling I get. I mean, this is very subjective. I can't offer any evidence, but this is the feeling I get. And it's quite nice because as a foreigner settled in another country, you can get a bit sick of being the foreigner and being people coming up to you and speaking to you in broken English and that kind of stuff. You can get a bit tired. And in the Chilean countryside, this doesn't happen. You're just another person from the Barrio Alto, from the high part of Santiago where the Cuicos live outside the smog.
Well, the Cuicos, the upper class Chileans, are more likely to come up to you and speak in broken English. Actually.
That's very true. And the campesinos do not have a word of English, and it's lovely actually. That's right. So this is the oddest feeling I get. It is only a feeling, but that the campesino is just perhaps influenced by kind of traditional ideas about the kind of Indian with this very long kind of conception of time, which is, I'm a Chilean campesino. These fair-haired people are here. They go around calling themselves Chileans. They run everything. They tell us what to do. But one day they'll just go away again. And everything will be like it was before.
Well, it's funny you should mention football, which of course is the only huge spectator sport in Chile. There's no other really viable ones as far as I can tell. If you ever see in an airport a Chilean Olympic team or age group, Olympic destined team playing Olympic sports, they genuinely do look, perhaps not white, but they look like wealthy Argentinians or wealthy southern Brazilians. They don't look Chilean at all when you see them in a group. If you saw one or two members of that ski team distributed throughout Chilean society,
team,
it doesn't necessarily look so strange, and it's interesting.
Whereas the football team is very clearly, that's the real sort of working class bedrock of the country.
And the tallest and lightest one will often be made captain. That's the tradition.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe it's not that harsh. That's the tradition we're coming from.
And so, and as we mentioned at the beginning, there has actually been a pretty large change. I would say just within the last 5 years, really, it's become so noticeable, which is an enormous level of immigration.
Yes. Different kind of immigration. not transoceanic immigration.
That's right, because I suppose the last there was a big wave 100 years ago. In fact, the kind of present ruling class is largely drawn from the ranks of people who've descended from this big European immigration of about around 1920, that kind of early 20th century.
Yes, and even beforehand, during the 19th century, establishment of a lot of the commercial colonies, they were called, the small communities of people who were initially British and
German,
French,
Italian, they had their own villages, their own places, that's right.
Their descendants, somewhat endogamous, but not entirely for very long, usually would marry into...
Yes, that's right. But probably marry, largely into other European groups, I guess.
Other European groups and also wealthy Basque-descended Chileans, for example, would marry successful merchant or military families.
In kind of age-old pattern, that's right. And then there was the Arab immigration, the end of the Ottoman Empire, wasn't there?
Yes.
Kind of Eastern Christian.
Far and away the biggest immigrant group during the 20th century. There's also, quite a bit of Italian and Spanish immigration during the Spanish Civil War, for example. After World War II, there's a bit of very little Ashkenazi Jewish immigration. Also, the church helped bring some German experts, some engineers and so on, out of Germany after 1945.
That's right, but then that was the last. That was it. Really wasn't it for the next. 60. More than 60 years, over half a century, there was very little immigration.
Yeah, Chile was not very attractive during the 1950s, 60s,
right.
90s.
You name it. But suddenly that's all changed. But where are the new immigrants coming from?
Well, yes, they've come in a number of ways from different Latin American countries.
Right.
Perhaps most emblematically, Haitian immigrants began to arrive after Chilean soldiers served as peacekeepers, blue helmets, in
the United Nations
about 15 years ago, I believe.
That's right. Or even more recently. About that.
And apparently the soldiers made a good impression on the locals. And
so Chile appeared on the map of the local people. I suppose most have probably never heard of Chile before that.
I'm not too sure what the situation was, but certainly a lot of Haitians began to arrive in Chile, often working on the harvests, very helpful. It's often hard to get labour to do harvest work, construction work as well.
A remarkable feature of this new immigration, which was also true of the old immigration, but that took place in different economic circumstances, is that whereas in Western countries, immigrants tend to head for big cities and stay there, and it's a long time. The number of, for example, black inhabitants of the English countryside is very small.
Yes.
Here, they immediately started fanning out into the countryside, didn't they?
Yes.
And you see agricultural workers who are visibly, obviously, of African descent, so they're Colombian, Haitian, and of course others not so visibly different, but must be from Colombia, Venezuela.
Yes. And of course, it's large numbers of other Andeans in Chile from Peru and Bolivia, which are countries that traditionally have a certain level of animosity towards Chile.
But have found in it a source of employment and remittances. Yeah.
And there were a lot more Colombians than Venezuelans until recently. The last probably 5 years, I would say, Venezuelans have taken over as one of the certainly most diverse groups here. You get from wealthy Venezuelans, although most of the wealthiest Venezuelans will go to the United States, Spain, Mexico.
But a lot of professional Venezuelans, a lot of musicians. You find suddenly there are a lot of piano teachers and violin teachers from Venezuela.
Yes, which is a big part of Venezuelan education.
Is music, this great classical music tradition that developed there.
Yes, and very poor Venezuelans here as well as people who were middle-class Venezuelans and families have fallen into desperate poverty, owing to the ratcheting down of the economic situation. That's
it. So for the first time in hundreds of years, you suddenly have people of visibly African descent walking the streets, which hasn't been seen for a very long time. So a big change, but in a way not such a big change, because the new immigrants, by and large, fit into the template of rich equals European looking, poor equals, indigenous, black, darker skinned. They fit into that template fairly well. So not too disturbing for Chilean society, despite large areas of cities having suddenly become immigrant districts. All those, quite disruptive changes have taken place here that we're used to in other countries. And so it hasn't really disturbed the existing order or provoked a debate about the association between skin colour and power, which is such a huge debate in North America and in Europe.
Well, actually, the term pigmentocracy is being used more and more by academics in the United States to discuss the possibility that there are not...
the actual word pigmentocracy?
Yes, the Chilean word.
So our immigrant to Concepcion, really? Okay. His
influence word. And the reason they use it is to compare all of the what English speakers might understand as the races: East Asian race, African race, European race, maybe with a couple of divisions within it. The possibility of simply lining all the people up according to how dark or how light they are. And in the United States, it's very interesting, of course, because we've got a lot of...
It's brilliant in its simplicity.
That's right. Well, look at East Asian immigrants to the United States. They're light in skin colour, by and large, and they're high in the hierarchy. So this term...
Also, in a part of South Africa, the Japanese were reclassified as white, weren't they? Because they had money, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's quite an interesting academic term that, together with colorism, which is the internal kind of discrimination that you'll get within, for example, African Americans will often look at what was, in slang terms, it's called yellow-coloured African Americans, people with lighter coloured skin. Peaches is another term that they would use. Lighter coloured skin was associated with more European practices and mores. Of course, that happens in Nigeria as well. All these places you hear about these skin whitening creams, this desire to appear, India as well, to appear more light-skinned, somehow fit with colorism in the sense of, well, you have a group and you're stuck within it, but pigmentocracy allows for you to line everyone up and consider
That's right.
a unifying sense of discrimination, which is just fantastic.
That's right, a grand unifying theory, like what they're always looking for in physics.
Of course, I must say, Neil, I must add, one problem in Chile is when you speak about ethnicity, by speaking about ethnicity in this country, sometimes you open yourself up to the accusation of being a racist. By even speaking out loud about it, despite the fact that the country clearly runs along pigmentocratic lines, as soon as you speak about it, you may be a racist. Did you know that?
I had not noticed that, actually, but then I suppose I don't speak about it very often. I just mention it in my columns, and then like in polite society, I don't mention it. Well, so this is it. So actually, while Chileans will very happily get indignant at the treatment of a black person killed in the States by the police and the racism in the States, they do seem to have completely failed to notice that they operate a system of racial division here. Therefore, there is no debate about it. Debate is discouraged, you say. And therefore, there's no reason to expect anything to change. And I think we can confidently expect the next cabinet to be as European looking as this cabinet was, and the previous, or not. There might be some little slow.
Well, I would say we've probably got the darkest Minister of Defence, which for most of Chile's history has been the most important job. Probably got the darkest one we've ever had in Mario Desbordes, who's originally working class, emergent middle class, a head of one of the conservative parties. And we're going to talk through all of the political parties in Chile, which will be interesting. We might even mention some of the social dynamics.
Sure thing. So maybe something's changing, but don't get too excited about the speed of change in Chile on that front. Okay, thank you very much for watching Chile Talk, and hope to see you next time.